Before becoming an entrepreneur myself, as founder and CEO of The Crew, I spent most of my career in the nonprofit sector. More specifically, I was a fundraiser charged with raising capital. And Jacqueline Novogratz was a legend for her thought leadership, her innovation, and her ability to execute. In 1986, Jacqueline quit her job on Wall Street to change the way the world tackles poverty. She founded and directed the Philanthropy Workshop and the Next Generation Leadership Programs at the Rockefeller Foundation before launching her organization, Acumen, which has invested $135 million to build more than 136 social enterprises across Africa, Latin America, South Asia, and the United States. She's an impact investment pioneer and developed the idea of patient capital, investing in intrepid entrepreneurs over not just a few years, but several decades. There isn't enough time in this entire program, let alone in this introduction, to list all of Jacqueline's recognitions. She's been named to Forbes magazine's 100 Greatest Living Business Minds, Daily Beast's 25 Smartest People of the Decade, and she's got 7 honorary degrees. She's ranked as one of the 25 most successful Stanford Business School graduates of all time. And she's the author of 2 best-selling books, The Blue Sweater and Manifesto for a Moral Revolution, Practices to Build a Better World. She's behind the concept of moral leadership, the idea that leaders need to navigate between the complex, messy nature of the world and their own ideals and values. And that's what she's going to tell us more about today. I'm sure Jacqueline's talk will spark many questions. Please use the event website to pose them, as she'll have a few minutes to answer them at the end of the session.
First, gratitude. Gratitude to Tiffany, to Cartier Women's Initiative for inviting me to speak today. Gratitude to all of you for the work that you do, the impact you have. I can see it rippling across the world. Gratitude for the shoulders on which we stand. Gratitude for the privilege of doing this work. So I'm here to talk today about the moral imagination, a leadership practice that is grounded in the humility of seeing the world as it is and holding to the audacity of imagining what it could be. It's never been more important than it is right now. We all know that the institutions on which we've counted for so long have in many ways run their course. This last year of the global pandemic has been almost like a heat-seeking missile aimed directly at the poor and the vulnerable, exposing the weaknesses of our systems, showing us that for too long we've counted on institutions that have put profit, the individual, money, power, fame at their center. And the work that we need to do, our work, is to reimagine them to put our shared humanity and the sustainability of the earth there. That's the moral imagination. That is our work. So many of us want to solve problems, but we use the lens only of our own imagination, even when solving problems for people whose lives are completely different from our own. Moral imagination takes a different approach. It starts with empathy, but it doesn't end there, because empathy without action reinforces the status quo. It has to move to a second stage, if you will, immersion, getting close, proximate to the people we want to serve, understanding the systems that get in their way and being honest about where they sometimes hold themselves back. From there, it's about moving into action and then using that moral imagination again to ground us in the why of the work that we're doing and help sustain. Empathy had me leaving Wall Street in 1986. I was working in Latin America and I loved the tools of banking. But what I didn't love was seeing people in the favelas, their vibrancy, their hard work, seeing those people excluded fully from the banks. And so that drove me on a mission, if you will, to Rwanda, where I co-founded the nation's first microfinance bank with a small group of Rwandan women. That gave me a real opportunity to immerse. And I would sit with the women in the open markets, in their homes, and I learned to listen from them, not just with my ears, but with all of me. By immersing with the women, I also, I learned so much about the work, about the systems. I'll just share three. First is that access to credit to markets when we're looking at low-income people, or all of us, it's not enough. People need the capabilities to actually make use of those opportunities. And so I learned what it meant to accompany people, not to solve their problems for them, but to let them solve it for themselves and help them build their muscles. Second, I learned that that the opposite of poverty is not wealth. The opposite of poverty is dignity. We yearn as human beings to be seen, to solve our own problems, to have choice. And finally, that if we are going to solve the toughest problems, we have to learn how to hold values in tension. At the very beginning, women taught me a lot by not paying, sometimes lying. And I learned that just being generous also wasn't enough. We had to hold generosity and tension with accountability. And so in 2001, 15 years of apprenticing, if you will, led me to another act of moral imagination, and that was starting Acumen. By then, I had really come to understand how capitalist systems, unbridled, reinforced inequality and too often did overlook and sometimes exploit the poor, but top-down approaches to government aid, charity, too often created dependency. At the center of this new vision, if you will, was the idea of patient capital, that we could take philanthropy and rather than give it away, invest long-term, 10 to 15 years long, in intrepid entrepreneurs who were going where markets and governments had both failed the poor: healthcare, education, energy, agriculture. We would accompany them, help them build their capabilities. We would measure what mattered, not just what we could count. And any money that came back would be reinvested in other innovation for the poor. Moral imagination, though, was also required because it's one thing to start a venture that takes on the status quo. It's another thing that sustains. I remember I was almost 40 and still I would sit in big offices on Wall Street or Silicon Valley, and very confident businessmen would tell me that clearly I didn't understand business. That they said, Jacqueline, I'd make my money here, I'd give it away there. And those conversations could be humiliating. Sometimes making me cry at night, wondering, is this really going to work? But I think that each of us, and maybe especially women, have a bull and a dove inside of ourselves. That bull is full of ferocity, determination, and that dove has a bit more vulnerability and tenderness, sometimes doubt. But when that bull and dove are dancing, that is when the moral imagination is unstoppable. And that is what I learned. And if I had one piece of advice for my younger self, it would be to stand without apology a little bit earlier. Because now, 20 years later, after we've moved almost $1 billion into markets for the poor and served over 300 million low-income people, I can do just that. But what excites me right now, in this moment of our history where there is so much opportunity to create real change, is to see a new generation of young entrepreneurs, especially women, who are deploying their moral imagination and fully reimagining ways that we can empower other women to be their best selves. I think of Suhani Mohan, an Indian engineer who looked across her nation and saw the problem of menstrual health and decided to do something about it, but not using business as usual. She started with immersion, understanding that in the rural areas, tribal areas, areas where women were often caught in situations of violence and conflict and cut off from climate change, that she needed to think about a whole new system. And so she built a distributed manufacturing company so that women in villages could buy factories and manufacture their own sanitary napkins, hire from the community to serve local women, also building women's capabilities, their knowledge, so that they understood the issues of menstrual health. Her real radical move, though, was recognizing that people in some of those areas didn't trust people like her. And so she allowed every village to create their own brands, which is anathema to a traditional investor who sees all the values in the brand. Suhani then had to find partners, investors, who shared her moral imagination. And today that company has 40 factories and has distributed over 6 million sanitary napkins to very low-income women. Or I think of her sister in Pakistan, Sara Saeed Khurram, also a Cartier fellow, a doctor who saw that 30% of her fellow doctors, women across Pakistan, stopped practicing once they got married. And at the same time, in the rural areas, she saw women fully disconnected from real quality healthcare. And so she used the current technologies, telemedicine, to connect those doctors to 26 private health clinics that grew through Sehat Kahani and really saw success. But on the first day of lockdown during this pandemic, all private clinics were closed. So Sara tapped again into her moral imagination. Rather than just pull in shutdown, she decided to make the app free. Call on more women to volunteer. And by now, over 350,000 rural women have been served by Sehat Kahani, and 5,000 women doctors are on the network. Sehat Kahani is partnering with government, and I assure you this will be part of public health going forward in Pakistan. That's the power of moral imagination. And when you think about the impact, and all of you are in one way or another engaging in this kind of work, when you think about the impact, think about the ripples. Because yes, thousands of women are served directly. Their families are changed. Their communities are transformed. Think about the jobs that are created. Think about the mindsets that are changed. The investors who don't look at naivete or idealism the same way and recognize that they too need moral imagination in the way that we all give more than we take. And so, if I started in gratitude, let me end with hope, but not an easy hope. Because as I have said, the work of change is hard. The status quo exists for a reason. This work can last for years, decades, sometimes lifetimes. But part of the moral imagination is recognizing that the kinds of systems we build that put our shared humanity and the earth at the center are a chance to build systems of mutual support. And in that mutual support lies the seeds of our shared dignity. Remember too, that you all are part of a growing field of individuals, entrepreneurs, people within corporations, recognizing that we need all of us who want to make change, that we are all part of a moral revolution focused on putting our humanity at the center. And in those moments when you are low, remember the words of Maya Angelou, who said that I come as one, but I stand as 10,000. And so I wish all of you the humility to see the world as it is, but hold to the audacity of what could be. Stand with that hard-edged hope. I wish you all of that. I wish you gratitude, and I wish you love, because the world has never needed you more. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jacqueline. I am so inspired and really by your insights. The first thing that I think of is that empathy without action just reinforces the status quo. And I'm just so moved by all of your remarks, as are a number of people who are chiming in. One of the other things that I keep in mind is that the opposite of poverty is dignity. When you said that the opposite of poverty is not wealth, I thought that it was. What is it? We have a number of questions that are coming in for you. The first I'm interested in as well. Francine asks, if you had to start a social enterprise right now, what would you solve as a problem? What social enterprise would you start?
It's such an unfair question.
I know, right?
Even though I really appreciate it. I mean, the joy of Acumen, frankly, is that because we now work with almost 1,000 entrepreneurs between Acumen Academy, which has 900, and then the entrepreneurs in whom we invest is another 135, so more than 1,000. Is that I'm watching a new generation do so many different moves, and where I feel that Acumen really has a place, something to offer, is not only around the tools of moral leadership, and in many ways, Acumen Academy is a social enterprise, but also when I talked about no apologies, I think maybe we were too gentle on the economy 20 years ago, and now I'm watching the capability to build entirely new financial instruments, where we have a company in Los Angeles called Everytable, and also, like Sarah, during the pandemic, decided to essentially deliver food in food deserts in Compton, Los Angeles, for free, but also ask people to pay it forward if they could, because these were very low income people who needed food. And by the end of the pandemic, they have now delivered about 6 million meals. They have really grown their company, and they've recognized that as they grow, they want their Black and brown employees who don't necessarily have huge levels of education, but huge capability, to have the opportunity to start a franchise. So they're out there raising money where they'll pay 1% over 10 years so that they can on lend to individuals who might not have capital of their own, but over time, as they pay off their debt, they will own a franchise. When I see this stuff, Tiffany, I feel like this is where I would spend the rest of my life, because we are in a new place of creativity and recognizing that capital exists as a means to solve problems. But for too long, we saw it as the end in and of itself. So that's where I want to play.
Amazing. I have family in Compton that has benefited from that program.
So really?
I was very delighted to see that you were responding and that you've supported that. We have one more question. You're talking about the moral imagination, and we have a question about what moral leaders you respect and you admire, that you look up to, that you feel reflect the moral imagination that you talk about. And I'd love for us to end with you talking about some leaders that you respect and admire.
I mean, it's such a great question, and at one point, probably a decade ago, I would go around and ask young people all the time to tell me who the moral leaders were that they admired, and it was so depressing to me that they kept coming up with dead people. And I started to ask myself, who are those moral leaders? And what I see is a whole generation of young people, whether it's Greta or Malala, Jacinda in New Zealand, lots of women on this list who almost are like Antigone in the play by Sophocles, who are truth tellers, but who don't just tell truth on behalf of themselves, are telling truth on behalf of people whose lives are very different from their own, and are working towards solutions, sometimes in very uncomfortable ways. And so I guess I would end, Tiffany, by saying, sometimes when we put people on a pedestal and say, well, that's a moral leader, then it gets really easy to throw them off the pedestal. And I'm starting to think that maybe the aspiration is for each of us to engage in acts of moral leadership, and to recognize that we don't need another hero. We need millions of heroic acts, and that each of us, every one of us, by focusing on others before self, on thinking of investment as a means, on showing up, on practicing being kind when we feel like being anything but kind, have opportunities to be moral leaders to try to create change in a world that knows it needs to change but doesn't like change. And maybe that's the real hope of the idea of moral revolution. Not in this big, we're going to take down the fortress, but that we're going to build it from the inside.
I love that, Jacqueline, and thank you so much for your leadership. If there's one person that I admire that exhibits moral imagination, it is you. And it has been a delight to be in conversation with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.